The ghost animals of history. What if history was incomplete? What if the most important figures in shaping civilization were not kings, generals, or inventors, but animals? Every textbook speaks of empires, battles, and rulers. Yet hidden between the lines are faint, vanishing paw prints, wings, and scales. Creatures that left no written record, yet altered the course of human destiny. These are the ghost animals of history. Some were colossal, commanding awe and fear. Others were so small they were nearly invisible. But from the tiniest insect to the largest beast, these animals shaped the rise of civilizations. They spun threads that built empires. They pollinated crops that fed kingdoms. They carried stones that built monuments. They marched into war, guided explorers across oceans, and whispered messages between distant lands. And then they were forgotten. The vanishing chapter of history. Human history is often told as a story of people alone, ambitious rulers, brilliant thinkers, decisive battles. But this narrative leaves out a missing chapter. The silkworm, whose fragile threads created one of the most powerful trade networks in history. The honeybee, whose labor sustained agriculture and kept empires alive. The horse, the camel, the ox, creatures of burden, without whom our greatest monuments and cities could never have stood. And the war animals, elephants, pigeons, dogs, who tipped the balance of empires. Their influence is undeniable, yet their names fade into silence. Remove them from the story and human history unravels. Without bees, famine. Without beasts of burden, no roads, no castles, no cities. Without navigators of feather and fin, no great voyages. Without animals in battle, empires may never have risen. And yet their contributions are barely whispered in our histories. They are the erased, the overlooked, the ghosts that linger at the edges of every triumph. Legends and whispers. From our earliest beginnings, we recognize their power. The first art ever made paintings deep within caves was not of kings, but of animals. Mammoths, bison, lions, sacred beings that shaped our imagination. In Mesopotamia, bees symbolized order and divine harmony. In Egypt, cats were guardians of grain and protectors of the underworld. Norse sagas spoke of ravens carrying wisdom to the gods. Across the Americas and Asia, animals bridged the human and the divine, teaching, guiding, and inspiring. To forget them is to forget the very foundation of belief, survival, and progress. The promise of the journey ahead. This is the journey we will take tonight. We will uncover the unsung architects of civilization, tiny creatures whose unnoticed labor shaped the birth of empires. We will follow the beasts of burden whose strength raised monuments and carried nations forward. We will march alongside the animal allies of warfare and exploration, creatures whose instincts determined victory and discovery. And finally, we will trace their fading footprints to understand why their stories disappeared, and why they still matter today. This is not the history, you know. This is history as it truly was, woven with fur, feather, and scale. A story incomplete until their voices are heard. These are the ghost animals of history. And tonight, we bring them back to life. Unsung architects of civilization, the silent builders. When we think of civilization, we imagine grand monuments, mighty rulers, and armies marching to the beat of drums. But hidden in the shadows of history are smaller forces, fragile, tireless, and overlooked. creatures who built the scaffolding of empires without ever knowing they had done so. These are the unsung architects of civilization, tiny builders whose work echoed across continents, shaping the survival and destiny of humankind. Silkworms and the thread of empires. In the mulberry groves of ancient China, a humble insect performed a miracle. The silkworm, no larger than a thumb, spun threads so fine, so radiant, that they would become the most coveted fabric on earth. From these fragile strands, dynasties rose. The Han emperors guarded the secret of silk production with ruthless devotion, revealing the process was punishable by death. And yet, the secret spread, thread by thread, until it wove together Asia, the Middle East, and Europe in a vast web of trade. The Silk Road, history's greatest artery of commerce, was born not from kings or warriors, but from the silent labor of silkworms. They were unknowingly the economic engines of entire civilizations. The silkworm reminds us that history's most powerful forces are often the most delicate. An empire clothed in threads spun by a creature so small it could rest in the palm of a hand. The bees, nature's hidden engineers. If silkworms clothed empires, bees fed them. Civilization is agriculture, and agriculture depends on pollination. Without bees, ancient fields would wither, and harvests would vanish. In Mesopotamia, bees were revered as divine messengers, the very symbol of order and harmony. Egyptians carved bees into temple walls, linking them to resurrection and eternity. But beyond myth and symbol, their labor had real, irreplaceable power. They stabilized food supplies, allowed populations to grow, and sustained cities that might otherwise have starved. Honey itself was prized not just as food, but as medicine, preservative, even currency. It sweetened offerings to gods, preserved fruits and wines, and treated wounds in battlefields. To the ancients, bees were alchemists turning flowers into gold. Every empire that thrived on farming owed its survival to the buzzing hum of creatures so often ignored. In truth, these were the architects of human abundance, colossal teachers, the prehistoric megafauna. But before cities and crops, before silk and honey, there were the giants. Mammoths, aurochs, bison, the great megafauna of prehistory. To our ancestors, they were not just prey, but teachers. Hunting them taught cooperation, strategy, and innovation. The bones of mammoths became the frames of shelters, their tusks tools, their hides clothing and protection, and in their very movements they dictated the paths of humanity. Following herds, early humans spread into new lands. Megafauna were living compasses guiding the migration of our species. Even in art, the giants lived on. The first sacred images etched into stone were not of people but of animals. Painted with reverence, worshipped with awe. To forget them now is to forget that the very birth of human imagination was inspired by animals, forgotten byproducts, the subtle powers of the obscure. Not all animals shaped history through strength or size. Some influenced civilization in ways invisible, yet profound. The murex snail, crushed to create the purple dye of royalty. A single robe could require thousands of shells, making purple the color of emperors and emperors alone. Whale oil lit the darkness of ancient nights, fueling lamps long before gas or electricity. Even bones carved into tools, instruments, and even instruments of prophecy extended the reach of human imagination. These obscure contributions, so easily forgotten, fueled the birth of technology, ritual, and culture. Animals were not only food or labor, they were catalysts of innovation. The invisible foundations of civilization. Civilizations stand on invisible foundations. Roads, temples, palaces, each carries the imprint of animals that labored, guided, and sustained them. The silkworm clothed emperors. The bee sustained the farmer. The mammoth taught survival. The snail, the whale, the ox all added their thread to history's tapestry. Yet their stories fade, their names erased. We celebrate rulers and kings, but rarely the silent creatures who made their reigns possible. To truly understand our past, we must look again through the eyes of those who never sought glory, yet shaped the world in ways no human alone could. They are the unsung architects of civilization, the beasts of burden and breakthrough, the living engines of history, every stone lifted, every road built, every city raised from the ground, was carried not only by human hands, but by the strength of animals. They were the engines of history before machines, the muscle behind ambition, the silent partners in creation. Without them, Rome would never have spread its roads. Egypt would never have raised its pyramids, and medieval Europe would never have crowned its castles on the hills. These were the beasts of burden and breakthroughs, the forgotten builders of civilization. In the fields of Mesopotamia, oxen pulled plows through rich, fertile soil, transforming wilderness into farmland. In Egypt, donkeys and cattle dragged stone for temples and tombs. In Rome, mules carried military supplies along roads that stretched farther than any empire had dared before. These animals did not choose their place in history, yet they bore its weight on their backs. The walls of Babylon, the aqueducts of Rome, the cathedrals of Europe all were built with hooves, not just hands. Every monument we admire today was paid for not only in human sweat, but in the silent endurance of beasts who left no names carved in stone. Camels, the ships of the desert. Across deserts where no wheel could turn, one animal reigned supreme, the camel. Called the ship of the desert, camels transformed isolation into connection. Their endurance carried salt, spices, and silk across the burning sands. They linked North Africa to the Middle East, Arabia to Asia. With every step, they stitched continents together. Without camels, the great caravan routes would have been impossible. The Sahara would have been a barrier instead of a bridge. Arabia would have remained isolated instead of becoming the crossroads of trade and faith. Camels carried not just goods, but ideas, languages, and religions across the world's harshest landscapes. Their hoof prints are written into the story of civilization itself. Horses, the masters of mobility. If camels ruled the desert, horses ruled the plains. The horse was not simply transport. It was transformation. With horses, humans extended their reach beyond imagination. A message could travel faster, an army could strike harder, a ruler could hold a wider empire. From the chariots of ancient Egypt, to the cavalry of Rome, to the unstoppable Mongol hordes, the horse was the heartbeat of conquest. It was speed, power, and dominance made flesh. But the horse was more than a weapon. It was freedom. Nomadic tribes carved entire identities around the bond with their mounts. Warriors were buried alongside their horses, believing they would ride together in the afterlife. The horse is not just remembered in war, It gallops in our myths, our art, our very language. Pegasus, Sleipnir, the steeds of heroes, symbols of speed, grace, and transcendence. The horse did not just carry humanity forward. It elevated humanity into a new dimension of power. The mule, the overlooked hybrid. Between the grandeur of the horse and the endurance of the donkey lies the mule, an animal so often overlooked yet indispensable. Mules carried armies through mountains, supplies across roads, and goods into markets. Stronger than donkeys, more resilient than horses, they were the true workhorses of empires. The Roman legions marched not just with soldiers, but with mules bearing food, weapons, and tents. Without them, the empire's expansion would have starved. In medieval Europe, monasteries and towns alike depended on mule caravans. They were the quiet lifeline of commerce. History rarely honors them, but without the mule, the grand designs of kings and generals would have collapsed into hunger and ruin. Animals as living libraries. Narrator, mysterious, contemplative. Not all animals shaped history by building or carrying. Some changed it by teaching us through their very bodies. Rats, fleas, and other creatures carried plagues across continents, reshaping societies through death and survival. From these tragedies, physicians slowly began to understand disease and immunity. Snakes, studied for their venom, gave rise to antidotes and medicines. Dogs, with their keen senses, inspired new ideas about healing and detection. Horses and camels carried not only goods, but the germs that forced humans to develop new resistances. These animals were living libraries. Though often unwilling, they became teachers, forcing humanity to confront its fragility and pushing us toward knowledge. Beyond pets, sacred companions. Some animals were more than workers. They were companions, protectors, and sacred symbols. In Egypt, cats guarded grain stores, keeping pests away, but they were also revered as divine protectors. To harm a cat was to offend the gods. Dogs, loyal across cultures, hunted beside humans, guarded their homes, and guided their spirits into the afterlife. Their graves lie beside their masters, testaments of a bond deeper than labor. Cows were not only food or plow pullers, they were sacred mothers in Hindu tradition, symbols of life itself. Across the world, animals were woven into ritual, myth, and devotion. They were not just muscle, but meaning. Their presence shaped belief as much as survival. The burden and the breakthrough. Beasts of burden carried not only our loads, but our dreams. They bore the stones that became cathedrals. They crossed deserts that became highways of trade. They galloped into wars that forged empires. They guarded the temples and watched over our dead. In every breakthrough of civilization, they were there, silent, tireless, unseen. We forget them because they left no words, no monuments. But their legacy is carved into every road, every city, every belief. They remind us that history is never written by humans alone. To walk through time without acknowledging them is to walk on the shoulders of ghosts. Animal allies in ancient warfare and exploration, they forgotten soldiers. Every general has an army. Every conqueror has a weapon. But behind the glory of kings and commanders stood allies who did not choose to fight. They were the forgotten soldiers of history, silent, obedient, and essential. From battlefields to oceans, from mountain passes to uncharted seas, Animals were the hidden force that won wars and opened worlds. Without them, history's victories might have been defeats. Its voyages, disasters. Its empires, mere dreams. Elephants, the titans of war. To face an army is one thing. To face a living mountain is another. War elephants were the tanks of the ancient world, towering beasts armored in steel, trampling infantry, breaking cavalry, and striking fear before the battle had even begun. Hannibal's march across the Alps is remembered as one of the greatest feats in military history. But the true marvel was not the general, it was the elephants. Crossing frozen peaks, starving, exhausted, yet carrying the Carthaginian dream of crushing Rome. Though many perished, their impact was lasting. The Roman legions, unshaken by most enemies, trembled at the sight of elephants bearing down upon them. They forced Rome to adapt, invent, and rethink strategy. Yet for all their terror, elephants were not invincible. At Zama, Rome learned to funnel them into traps. Fear turned to tactics, and the Titans' role in warfare faded. But their memory remains a reminder that even giants walked alongside human ambition. Horses, the heartbeat of conquest. No animal shaped the art of war more than the horse. The horse gave speed to armies, wings to empires, and freedom to nomads. Chariots thundered across Mesopotamian battlefields. Knights thundered across medieval Europe. Mongol cavalry swept across Eurasia, rewriting the map of the world. To ride was to dominate. To command 1,000 horsemen was to command the storm. Armies without horses could march. Armies with horses could fly. The horse was not just a soldier. It was a partner. Riders formed bonds so deep that warriors were buried with their steeds, believing they would ride together in eternity. The horse was more than a weapon of conquest. It was a symbol of loyalty, strength, and freedom. Dogs of war and guardians of camps. Not all allies towered over men. Some walked beside them. Dogs were guards, scouts, and fighters. They tracked enemies, carried messages, and stood as living alarms in the dead of night. The Romans bred mastiffs for battle, sending them against enemy lines with spiked collars. In Mesoamerica, dogs were more than companions, they were guardians of the underworld, guiding souls beyond death. In every culture, dogs were more than animals. They were brothers in arms. Birds, messengers, and navigators. Not all allies fought with tooth or tusk. Some carried whispers on their wings. Carrier pigeons, trained since ancient Persia, carried intelligence across vast distances. In war, a single bird could mean the difference between victory and disaster. Armies depended on their silent flights, each message worth more than gold. In exploration, seabirds guided sailors to land long before compasses. Polynesian navigators followed the flight of terns and frigate birds to discover islands scattered across the Pacific. To watch the sky was to read a map drawn in wings. Birds were living compasses, messengers of survival. Camels and mules, the lifeline of armies. Victory is not only won on the battlefield, it is won in the supply lines. Camels carried food and water through deserts where no other creature could survive. Mules bore weapons, tents, and rations across mountains where wheels broke and men collapsed. An army marched on its stomach, and it was these beasts who kept soldiers alive. Without them, no war could last, no conquest could continue. Their names are not carved on monuments, yet their strength built the foundation of every campaign. Exploration, guided by instinct. Exploration was never a human endeavor alone. Before compasses, before maps, animals guided humanity across the unknown. Dolphins swam beside ships, leading them through safe waters. Whales revealed migration routes. Sea turtles inspired navigation techniques. The great migrations of animals were living calendars and maps for the boldest explorers. When Polynesian navigators set sail into the endless Pacific, they did not sail blind. They watched the flight of birds. They studied the movements of fish. They trusted the wisdom of animals to guide them across thousands of miles of open sea. Without these guides, the great voyages of discovery might never have left the shore. The hidden generals of history. Wars are remembered for kings and generals. Explorations for captains and heroes. But beneath their triumphs lies a truth too often forgotten. Animals were the hidden generals, the silent navigators, the companions who bore the weight of human ambition. They fought without choosing. They guided without asking. They gave everything and received only silence in return. Yet their legacy endures. In every victory, every voyage, every empire, you will find them. Their footprints are the true map of human history. To tell the story of war and exploration without them is to tell only half the truth. Their fading footprints are lasting legacy, the silence after the echo. Every empire has its ruins. Every civilization leaves behind fragments of what once was. But beyond the stone, beyond the records, lies a quieter legacy one, written not in ink, but in hoofprints, feathers, and wings. For every animal that shaped our past, there comes a moment when its story vanishes into silence. Yet silence does not mean absence. Their footprints linger in the soil of history, faint but never fully erased. And if we listen closely, we can still hear them. Why we erased them? History is a story we tell ourselves. But who chooses the storyteller? We celebrate generals, but not the horses that carried them into glory. We honor emperors draped in silk, but not the worms who spun the threads. We praise architects of monuments, but not the oxen that hauled the stones. Perhaps we chose this silence out of pride and unwillingness to admit that human greatness has never stood alone. Perhaps it is because animals cannot write their own stories, and so we believe they had none. But history without them is incomplete. It is like a song with missing notes, a monument missing its foundation. The vanishing companions. Some of these companions are gone forever. The aurochs, ancestor of cattle, once thundered across Europe, its strength shaping agriculture, its image painted on cave walls. Now it is extinct. The war elephants of Carthage giants that shook Rome are no more. The carrier pigeon, whose wings carried secrets and saved lives, vanished in the 20th century, leaving only bones in museums. What does it mean when the animals who walked with us vanish? It means we lose more than a species. We lose a piece of ourselves. For every extinction is a lost story, a missing chapter in the book of humanity. Echoes that still surround us. Yet not all are gone. Many still walk beside us if we choose to see them. The honey bee continues its ancient labor, a silent ally whose pollination sustains billions. The camel still carries burdens across deserts, as it did for traders on the Silk Road. The horse still runs, its spirit bound to ours since the first rider climbed onto its back thousands of years ago. And in every city, in every village, in every corner of the earth, animals echo their ancient roles: protectors, companions, guides, builders. Their legacy is not past tense. It is present, breathing, alive. Lessons from the ghosts. The ghosts of history do not haunt us out of malice. They remind us. The mammoth tells us of climates that changed and the fragility of survival. The dodo warns us of carelessness and destruction. The aurochs reminds us that even the mightiest can vanish. Each ghost whispers a lesson. That survival is never guaranteed. That every creature matters, no matter how small or strange. That we are part of a web, not standing above it. The moral reckoning, gratitude, and debt. They carried our burdens. They built our roads. They fought in our wars. They fed our children. They clothed us, warmed us, guided us. And in return, most were forgotten. What debt do we owe them? It is not one we can repay in stone monuments or written words. It is one we must repay in gratitude, memory, and protection. To honor their role is to see ourselves truthfully, not as masters of the earth, but as partners within it. Modern echoes, the fragile thread. Today our survival is still bound to theirs. The bees' decline threatens global food security. The disappearance of fish reshapes cultures that depend on the sea. The shrinking habitats of elephants, wolves, and great cats remind us how fragile the balance is. History has shown us that without animals, our empires would never have risen. The question we face now is simple. Without them, can our future survive? The call to memory. To remember them is not to romanticize the past. It is to complete the story of who we are. Every vanished paw print is a reminder of our interdependence. Every extinct species is a warning of what silence costs. Every surviving ally is a chance for gratitude. The ghost animals of history ask us for nothing but remembrance. Yet in remembering, we find responsibility for their survival and for ours. They walk beside us still. They are not gone, not truly. In the loyalty of a dog at your side, in the flutter of a bird guiding sailors, in the hum of bees feeding nations, in the strength of a horse running free. The ghosts of history are not only shadows. They are companions, present and eternal, walking beside us still. Their voices may be quiet. Their names may be lost, but their legacy endures in every field, every city, every life touched by their hidden labor. To forget them is to forget ourselves. To remember them is to see the truth, that humanity has never been alone. We rose together. We endured together. And together we must continue. These are the ghost animals of history. They shaped our past. They echo in our present. And they will guide our future if we let them.